It's more fun winging it. All this and more coming up on This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
Befriending Spectrum owners.
Atari's newest arcade cabinet.
And Flash, I love you.
All this and more coming up on this week's show. Up-to-date news for out-of-date tech. Hello guys, another week, another show, and there are 5 of us squeezed into this week's show because I've got a couple of special guests. I have Lee from More Fun Making It.
Hello.
And his son Thomas with us, and they're going to tell us all about why they're here in a little while. But before we get to that, because we're going to dedicate the whole, I'm going to dedicate the whole first story to what they're doing here, so we'll hear all from them shortly. Before we get to that, what have you guys been up to this week?
Chris, you go first.
Me? Well, actually, the stuff I was going to share is relevant to the story you're covering, Dave, so I'll save it to then. So over to you.
Okay. I have
Dave,
been
you've been scrubbing a
incredibly busy.
keyboard.
I have. I've been scrubbing and sanding. I wanted the best keyboard you can get for a Mega STE is the Mega ST keyboard. So I got one of those. It came in. It was an absolute shambles of a keyboard. So I have been repairing it. I've been sanding down the metal to get rid of the rust. So you can see this here. So the next job is to desolder all of those switches and replace them with Cherry MX Brown switches. Meanwhile, the keycaps are outside in the Scottish lovely weather. It's, of course, cloudy and will rain later on, despite the forecast, in the hope that they retrobite. And when that's done, I should have a lovely restored keyboard. I'm lucky that there was nothing wrong with the keyboard electrically. It was all physical, but it was absolutely filthy. I've also nearly finished my Amiga. I'm waiting on Lee Smith, not the Lee it's on just now, the other Lee, because there's 2 Lees. Lee Smith is making me an adapter plate for the power supply, so I can use a TFX in an SFX place. And I also need an IDE buffer for the Amiga because connecting the CD-ROM drive just kills it. The IDE cable is too long.
As I keep saying to Dave, you won't use the CD-ROM drive on your Amiga. You won't use it, but he's determined to have a CD-ROM drive and make it work. And I must say also, Dave, watching you do all of this over the last couple of days, and I'm sure Lee will relate, it makes me incredibly jealous watching you just do a restoration and not have to film it. You're having a lovely time doing this, aren't you?
I've been spitting photos out to Neil so he can see it. On the other hand, though, it's taken over my house. My house is an absolute midden at the moment. Midden's a good Scottish word for you. My house is a mess at the moment. And it is starting to stress me out. I can't wait to reclaim the space and tidy up, because I've also got the floppy Tower of Power on the go. That's kind of stalled while these other 2 things are going. I've got some soldering to do. I ordered some PCBs, and I made a mistake in the order, and I got a 2.2 kilo ohm resistor in 2 places rather than a 22 ohm, which of course, if it's on the USB line, nothing happens. The USB signal just gets effectively blocked. It's like cutting the trace almost. So once that's fixed,
I'm really looking forward to handing the mic over to Lee to tell you all about why he's here. Let's just have a quick bit of housekeeping from you, Dave.
Not much this week. Lots of response to the Atari story from last week. Lots of comments. Some people are a bit skeptical about how it will work out. Other people are really enthusiastic. I think I'm still enthusiastic, but my expectations are not unreasonable. I'm not expecting perfection. It'll still be good. I'd also like to welcome our new patron, Shane. So he says, hello all, greetings from Brisbane, Australia. Is Brisbane near you, Chris?
Oh, yes, just down the road. Yeah, literally just 3,000 kilometres away. Yeah.
3,000 kilometres, okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Love the show. It makes my Sunday mornings with coffee all the better. You can pop down and see him then. Say thanks.
Yeah, I might pop over after this. Yeah, see what he's doing for dinner.
Ideal. If you would like to join Shane, then www.patreon.com/thisweekinretro. And that'll do.
So if you're watching the video version of the podcast, we've magically shuffled around here. Lee is taking center stage on the mic. Lee, why don't you just tell us why you're here today?
I'm here today to promote the charity drive that I'm doing at the moment. I
something happened a little while ago. The other Lee Smith, he donated a rather special case called a ZX Spectrum that he designed, a mechanical keyboard ZX Spectrum. And I thought that was too much for him to give to me. So I decided that we were going to charity auction this. And it's kind of grown from there. And the charity that we want to support is called the Befriending Scheme, which is something that Thomas this is my son Thomas. That Thomas benefits from. And it's something that supports adults in helping them maintain relationships. Any questions?
No, I've seen the Mectrum. The Mectrum itself is 3D. It's a really well 3D printed case that takes mechanical key switches and is it a 48K Spectrum board, or does it take more than that? Just a 48K?
It can take anything that will fit in a 48K normal rubber key case or a plus case will fit into the Mectrum case. But I've actually put something a bit more special in than a 48K.
What have you put in?
This one's a Harlequin 128K from Bike Delight. The
Harlequin.
Yeah,
the Harlequin. If I'm right, the Harlequin is a modern-ish. I mean, it's been around for a while. I think a modern-ish remake of the Spectrum that uses loads of logic chips to replicate the ULA. Am I talking nonsense?
So the standard Spectrum has its ULA. That's the heart of the machine that ties everything together. Chris Edwards wrote a book where he reverse engineered the ULA, and Don Superfo actually put that into practice and designed the Harlequin, and lots of iterations of it as well. And this is, I think this is I've actually done 2 of them. So there's not just going to be this one Spectrum. There's actually currently 5. I've brought some with me. Some are in these lovely cases behind us. So we've got 2 Harlequins of different revisions, and an old original Spectrum, another old original Spectrum, and an original Spectrum that I built from scratch. But yeah, going back to the Harlequin, the ULA was as I say, the beating heart of the Spectrum, and they replaced it with off-the-shelf 74 series logic chips, so that anyone could put this together without having to resort to stripping a ULA out of an original Spectrum. So yeah, it's really quite a clever thing. It's a hell of a build, because if you have a look at the Harlequin motherboard, the amount of chips on there is frankly ridiculous. They've even had to save space by putting some chips underneath other chips.
What?
So it's a lovely thing to build as well.
It's a bit like when you see like a Street Fighter 2 bootleg board, and it's just a city of chips covering the whole board. It is a bootleg Spectrum, effectively.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, clone Spectrum.
The difficult in replicating just about any microcomputer is the unique chips, the chipset, the custom chips, and for the Spectrum, that's the ULA. So if you can replicate that, then you can build a Spectrum from scratch without having to use an existing Spectrum or difficult to get new old stock parts. So it's really clever.
The good thing now is that there are actually modern replacements for the ULA, the VLA 82 and the Nebula. I've actually used a VLA 82 in the new build Spectrum that I've made. And every single chip in there, bar one, is brand new. And the one that isn't brand new is new old stock. So I'm calling it new. But the VLA 82 is actually, I think, a bit of a crowd favourite at the moment. The Nebula was my favourite, but it's so difficult to buy them because of obvious reasons.
So Lee and Thomas are here today to make an episode with me in the cave about. Now I was expecting 3 machines, but it's gone beyond the original 3.
I've brought 3 with me.
3, yeah. So we're going to take a good look at these builds.
Sorry, 4.
4 with you, okay.
It's 5 now.
Really?
We're going to take a look at them all. We're going to make a video about it. And then at the end of it, Lee's intention is to auction off these machines, isn't it?
Yeah, so on the 16th of September, I'm going to do a 12-hour live stream on my main channel.
At your age?
At my age, yeah. I've had a few comments about how are you going to...
32.
You're 32, yeah. He's
birthday.
He's not my
that's
age.
Time.
And yeah, so there's going to be a 12-hour live stream. I've got all the auctions ending throughout those 12 hours, or will have all the auctions ending throughout those 12 hours. And I've got some special guests to keep me going during the day. There's some guy called Neil who's coming on.
So Neil here.
He's actually not the headliner, though.
Not the headliner.
I've had to upstage him with someone else, but you'll have to come and see if you want to see the guest list. But yeah, yeah.
Dave, it's Dave, yeah.
Neil is actually Dave's bluffer, so
I love it.
So where do we go to sign up for that?
There's a couple of places you can go. So the Just Giving page is probably the best place to go. I'm not here to promote myself. I'm here to promote the charity. The Just Giving page is Just Giving / more
Duncan,
fun making it.
Help us out, Duncan.
It is just giving more fun making it. If you search for those, I'm sure someone will put some links in the show note in the description.
Yeah.
And I'm going to plug my channel a little bit because that's where the live stream is going to be. So I'm on YouTube at More Fun Making It there as well.
So tell us about the befriending scheme then. What's that?
Right, so that's an amazing thing. This is something we've I've been Thomas's parent since he was born, and we've been.
That's how it works.
Yeah,
I love it.
And we've seen lots of services that are good for people, with Thomas's needs in our area, come and go. And just recently, after the pandemic happened, and we were looking for something new for Thomas to do. We stumbled across the befriending scheme, and for Thomas, the thing that he accesses is the community farm. And what's it called? Your farm?
Red Rose County Farm.
Red Rose County Farm or community?
Red Rose County Farm in Lindsay.
In Lindsay.
Yeah.
And that's a fantastic place. It's truly magical. Brilliant. I go there and it's just a fantastic place for someone with additional needs to go to that can do things they wouldn't normally be able to access. And they've got some amazing facilities there. They've got lots of animals that they can interact with and look after and care for. They do all sorts of other farming things and woodwork and cooking and all sorts of things.
No ZX Spectrums there?
Not yet.
Not yet.
After this, there might be. What's your favourite thing to do at the farm?
Goats.
You feed the goats, don't you?
Yeah, big goats.
What the big goats? Not the pygmy goats. What are the big goats' names?
Doughboy, Rodney, Percy, and Pedro.
There we go. Doughboy, Rodney, Percy, and Pedro. Nice. But that's not the only thing they do. They run hubs in our local area where people can meet up and socialise, basically, but supported with volunteers. And some of the things that you see those guys do is great. They have who's the man who does the music?
Keith.
No, Will.
Will
is a musician, and he comes and
here.
And they have musical sessions and things like that. It's just it's a fantastic thing.
Yeah, sounds like a great place. So if you want to support the charity, or if you just want to be really selfish and get yourself an incredible ZX Spectrum, regardless, Lee is the man to follow, and all the links will be in the show notes.
Lee's put out videos for all of the Spectrums that he's doing. They've all got a certain theme to them. Nice. So have a look at it. Very interesting. Whether you're planning and putting a bin or not is very interesting. But that'll be a week from the day you're watching that stream will be a week from today. And hopefully Neil's video with obviously Neil's video with Lee will come out before it, I'd imagine. Afterwards, not much point.
Just one thing to add. If you can't afford to... but there will be some other items that are going up for auction. It won't just be the Spectrums. I've got a one-of-a-kind More Fun Making It mug. I'm going to see if I can steal an RMC mug as well.
Yeah.
We'll put that up for auction.
We'll sort that out.
There will be a couple of other bits and pieces in the auctions. But if you can't afford to win a brand new bespoke Spectrum in a posh flight case, then and you still want to contribute, then donate on the Just Giving page. And no matter how much you give, we've had some huge contributions and we've had some small ones. They all push us towards the target. So it's great. If you could do that, it would be really appreciated.
We are proudly sponsored by Pixel Addict magazine. Are pixels the last thing you think of at night before you go to bed? Are you shaking for pixels the first thing in the morning when you wake up? Well, then Pixel Addict magazine is the publication for you. Dave, are you a pixel addict? You seem to be shaking from the shoulders there.
I start every morning with a bowl of pixels. The last thing I do before I brush my teeth is wolf down some pixels at night. Can't sleep without them.
What happens if you go without pixels for a few days?
I start to turn into a bit vectory and stretched out.
Nice. Voxel man myself.
Voxels.
Well, if you can relate to our stories, then Pixel Addict magazine is the magazine for you to help you get your fix. Chris, what's the most recent story that you've read in Pixel Addict magazine? And why is the light changing on your face as if you're quickly visiting a website?
Is it? Oh, no. Sorry, I was actually quickly visiting.
You're not visiting pixeladdict.media, are you?
No, I wasn't. Yes, I was definitely visiting pixel.addict.media. Dave's turned into a pixel on our screen as well, which is quite interesting. And yes, my favourite story is the one that I looked at last week when you asked me this question, and I happened across a story about Acorns and BBC Micros. And as I haven't picked up the magazine since last week, that will have to be the story.
The man that's going to save us from this hole we've dug is Lee. Lee, tell us about Pixel Addict magazine.
Pixel Addict magazine is an amazing thing because it brings nostalgia into a format that is truly nostalgic. The internet for me back then in the 80s and 90s was magazines, and bringing that into a modern day is, I think, just a glorious thing to do, and it's a lovely, lovely magazine.
Far too professional for this show. Far too professional.
The problem is that now enough of our guests have seen how we've thrown previous guests under the bus.
Yeah, that was all scripted.
Oh, brilliant.
Well, if you like pixels and magazines, then head to pixel.addict.media, and we thank them for supporting the show.
Should we have an Atari story every week, lads? What do you think? Every week?
Well, I will jump in here because there was an interesting link last week between the two stories that we did, the MIDI Atari 2600, the 80% sized Atari, and the Dark Forces remaster. Now, the Dark Forces remaster is by Night Dive Studios, and more than one of our vigilant listeners pointed out that Atari acquired Night Dive in May of this year. So technically, it was an all Atari show last week.
Oh,
as it should be. As it should be. This week's story on Atari is submitted by Pajako. It is Atari's 50th year, and throughout it they've been coming out with various different things to celebrate it and get your cash into their trouser pockets. The biggest thing is probably the 50th compilation they released for various systems, and despite ignoring the Atari ST, it did seem to go down well. But the latest is a tie-in with Arcade 1-Up to make an Atari 50th branded arcade cab. Now, it's not a full-size cab. Like all the 1-Ups, it's a compromise because our home struggled to take a full-size cab. So it's a flat screen, of course, no CRT, which means it can get closer to the wall. It means it's a lot smaller. It's just not practical for them to sell them with CRT, so I can understand why they don't. But being the 50th, guess how many games it has? 64, of course. There are 50 2600 games, Atari 2600 console games, and there are 14 arcade games. So straight away, it's a little bit unusual and inventive for them to put 2600 games on it. but also only 14 arcade of all the arcade companies. Atari are giants, and they're all early games, and one of them was never released. At least two of them are kind of sequels. So if I was to list my favourite Atari games, well, they wouldn't be on this cab. What is on the cab, though, is Asteroids Deluxe, Asteroids, Centipede, Crystal Castles, Gravitar, Liberator, Lunar Lander, Major Havoc, Millipede, Missile Command, Space Duel, Super Breakout, Tempest, and Aka-R, which is the one that wasn't released.
Bless you.
I know. Aka-R. I like the name, though.
Question, Dave. My first question is, you were reading those out. Is there a spinner on it for games like Breakout?
There is. There's a trackball. Sorry, for there's a trackball for Missile Command. Yeah, and a joystick.
So you've at least got an analog input for the Breakout.
Yeah. So there's lots of good games there, but there's no Star Wars, there's no Gauntlet, there's no Super Sprint, no Paperboy, 720, Marvel Madness, Battlezone, Clax, Primal Rage, Road Blasters, Rampart. There's loads of games I'd want, and while it does have some big names, it feels quite limited and it feels as if it's centred in around a certain type of Atari game. Now, we've talked about quite a lot. We've talked about the idea of a one-up versus a full-size cabinet, so we won't go there again today. But what I wanted to ask you guys is how you feel about playing console or micro games in an arcade cabinet. I ask because it's the fourth thing I can think of I've come across recently that talks about this. We've had the Nintendo and Sega arcade cabs that Neil has acquired fairly recently. For playing NES, and is it Master System or is it Mega Drive? Master System, isn't it?
Mega Drive. So I've got the Nintendo Play Choice 10, which is NES, and the Sega Megatech, which is Mega Drive. Yeah,
got you. We've got the TF-MSX JAMA board. Now, Stephen Leary was recently on your channel talking about making that, and he made it for a bit of fun, and he made a JAMA board for it as well. And he says he's been loads of interest in it. So this is people who want to put an MSX into an arcade cabinet. And of course, when the Mister came out, there was lots of chat. And when the MMS came out, the multi-system as well came out, lots of chat about a JAMA harness for it again, so that people can put these into the arcade cabinets. There's clearly a desire to put these into arcade cabinets. So my question for you, Neil, first of all, is what's your favourite Atari arcade games? What games come to mind when you think about Atari in the arcades? And what do you think about playing console and micro games in an arcade cab?
I mean, we could talk for the rest of the show about this. There's some quite meaty topics you're throwing at me there, Dave. Starting with the arcades, Atari have been around for so long, but making arcades since before they even called themselves Atari. I think it was Syzygy, wasn't it, before Atari? So their arcades span all the eras, the Bronze Age of black and white and TTL logic arcade games, the Golden Age through to around 1984, spanning from Space Invaders past Pac-Man and beyond, and into the 90s when they had games like the Rush series of 3D racers, some of them based on 3DFX Voodoo hardware as well, which is something I was playing with last week. You'll see that in my next video. But the first games I think of, the games that really stand out for me personally when we talk about Atari, well, the ones that were all on the same holiday site. It was Butlins in Minehead. We used to visit quite frequently. And I associate that whole experience of joy and excitement and being on holiday with those arcade cabinets. I even associate the smell of chlorine with Indiana Jones, because that's where the arcade cabinet was, by the water park. And those games are Paperboy, Gauntlet, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and 720 Degrees. Those cabinets were all there. And there were other fantastic non-Atari ones, like Outrun was there, Dragon's Lair was there. So, I've got really fond memories of this place. Now, these particular games all come from the same period, the mid-80s. So Indiana Jones uses Atari's System 1 board. Paperboy and 720 used their later System 2 board. And Gauntlet was very similar to System 1, but I think it was a single board instead of multiple boards. So all kind of similar hardware, all putting out very different kinds of games. The main difference with the System 2 games is that they ran at a higher resolution. So they used a medium resolution monitor. And if you've ever played Paperboy or 720 in the arcades, you'll have noticed that they look sharper. It's an interesting look. It really makes them stand out when they're next to low resolution arcade games. So they also had unique cabinets. made them really special. 720 had the great big boom box on top of the cabinet. Gauntlet was huge to fit 4 players around. Paperboy had the handlebars. I struggled with the handlebars, but it had the handlebars. I've never got on with arcade games with handlebars. Like Enduro Racer is another one. Never got on.
Hang on. What about Hang On?
Hang On.
You
No, I
throw
can't get
Hang
with
On under the bus in favour of
Hang
Outrun.
On is very sensitive. I find it really sensitive to play, especially the sit-on Hang On. Really hard to play.
Yeah.
So I love everything about how unique each of these cabinets is and their special builds. And we have got Atari arcades down in the arcade archive here. We've got Gauntlet, we've got Star Wars, we've got Missile Command and Tempest. But my nostalgia sits with those other ones. So I'm always sort of pushing Alex, get a Paperboy, Alex, get a Paperboy. I'd really love to see that in there. Now, your second question was about playing console and micro games in an arcade, I think you were talking about. So I would just remind you that back in the day when we read our magazines, do you remember that there used to be adverts for flat-packed furniture designed to look like an arcade cabinet? Lee's nodding his head. No? Chris, do you remember these?
No.
They were definitely in there. I'll see if I can find a picture for
I'll take your word for it, but yeah.
So you could buy a piece of furniture that had the shelves on in which to put your Mega Drive or your NES or whatever and recreate the look of an arcade in your bedroom. And I was going to say we all wanted it, but you obviously never saw it. But when I saw it, I wanted it. You know, you wanted an arcade in your bedroom. And this was perhaps the closest thing you could get if you wanted to play Toe Jam and Earl in an arcade cabinet. So I have no problem with that. And whenever I've built a MAME arcade cabinet in the past, going back decades since I last built my first MAME cabinet, it was one of the highlights was being able to pop up consoles. I had sections for each system. And it was fun to be able to play Mega Drive games or even Amiga games, a game of Speedball 2 in an arcade cabinet. You know, there was nothing wrong with that. So I don't have any snobbery about playing those kinds of things. But I do agree with you. It's a bit of an odd list in this arcade one-up. I'll give you another example, which really justifies playing home computer games in an arcade cabinet. We recently picked up Archer McLean's incomplete Drop Zone arcade cabinet. So Archer McLean made Drop Zone on the home micros. There was never an arcade version of it, but he was at home making a cabinet for it. Dave?
It is very much an arcade game though. Drop Zone. It's.
Yeah.
I mean, you wouldn't want to be playing Populous with a trackball in an arcade cabinet, but Drop Zone, of course, you would.
Well, there was that unreleased version of Lemmings with a trackball for an arcade cabinet.
Why did it not get released? Yeah.
So our intention with this Drop Zone cabinet is to complete the build, put a menu in it, and allow you to pick which home version of Drop Zone you want to play. And I think that would be a really nice thing. So I would be hugely hypocritical if I were to say you shouldn't play home console or micro games in a cabinet. Just very briefly on this Arcade 1-Up Atari 50 cabinet itself, it's your bog standard Arcade 1-Up cabinet with stickers all over it. That's what it is. There's no uniqueness to the shape of it. It's not made to look like any particular Atari cabinet. It's just stickers. And that, you know, I'm not knocking, as we always say, if Arcade 1-Up machines suit you and suit your environment, there is nothing wrong with them. But if you're pushing this as a celebration of 50 years of Atari, I would have liked something a bit more Atari to it. You know,
I just want a wider range. It feels like they've zoned in on one kind of aspect to their games, and they've missed out that they could put a much wider range of games in. And then even if they only had 14 games in there, they could have picked 14 games that spread out a little bit more than that.
I probably don't want to take away anything from the other cabs that they've done though. So they've already done a Star Wars cab, haven't they? So they can't really put that on there. Plus Star Wars, how are you going to put the yoke on there? Some of the other ones are going to be a bit more tricky. So I'm not surprised at the list that they've got here. I was a bit surprised to see the console games on there, but there's the ones that they have put on there. I'm actually quite pleased about. So they fit well with the control scheme.
Lee, what about putting arcade machines? Putting consoles in arcade machines in general. I know you've built arcade machines. How do you feel about it? Is that a good way to play them? Yeah,
I've done this. I've built lots of bar top arcade machines, so even smaller than 1-Up's efforts. And I'll preface this by saying I'm not the target market. I do appreciate what they're doing, and I love the fact that they're driving lots of interest to retro enthusiasts into the hobby. It's great, but the arcade controls don't play well for me. There are some odd ones that work okay and probably better, but the whole thing with going back and experiencing a game on a certain system, in my opinion, is a feel thing. I want the whole experience, and playing a SNES game with a stick and a couple of buttons is not going to work for me.
Fair enough. I think that's reasonable.
Would it have been better, do you think, as this is supposed to be 50 years of Atari, just to release that classic yellow and black bezeled Pong? Just put out a new cabinet of Pong, or would that not be good for their sales?
They could have styled it as Pong and then had the games that suited the format as best as possible. Things like Indiana Jones, for example, there's no reason at all why that couldn't be in that cabinet. There's lots of games they could put in there that would suit. I mean, things like Zybots would need the twisty bit at the top, 720 wouldn't work. Lots of things wouldn't work, like Star Wars and so on. But there's lots of games that could work. But yeah, they should have styled it as Pong, perhaps.
On Indiana Jones itself, there may well be licensing issues there. So there could be things like that stopping them from re-releasing Indiana Jones again. But yeah, they could have put out exactly the same thing, like you say, with a Pong bezel, just rather than stickers. That would have made me happier. I would have liked that.
Christopher, tell us what you think.
Well, we're on Atari again, aren't we? I'll talk about the playing of the console games first. Actually, I'll go the other way around. And funnily enough, it was actually Australian Father's Day just this weekend, just passed. So I forced my boys to play me at some flashback games. So Atari 2600 games on the flashback, and they punished me for it by beating me at every single game that I chose, including things like Combat, Frog Pond, and what was the other one? Crackpot. Yeah, so I couldn't beat them. So then we canned that and played a board game, and they beat me at that as well. But what they did get me was why I mentioned Father's Day, is that my gift from one of them was the Atari 50 collection, which I've been waiting for ages. And that's very relevant to your story here, Dave, because the arcade games that you've listed are the same arcade ports that they've slapped on this compilation, the Atari 50.
Wow.
They're pretty much the exact same. And no, they are. I'm pretty sure, 100%, because I've been playing most of them yesterday, the exact same games. So obviously they've already got successful modern ports for them. So I guess it makes sense as to why they've chosen these same few. But it is a shame that they haven't sort of gone outside of that. I've no need for this cab because I'm surrounded by 2600s and I've got this. So, I've got the Atari 50 collection. So I don't really see a need for this. But saying that, when you look at the pictures, it does have a trackable. And is this the first arcade one-up cab with a trackball? I think I'm right in saying that. I can't think of another one.
I'm not that familiar with the range to say. I know you've got the Outrun one with the steering wheel. You've got the yoke.
I don't think they've done one with a trackball before. And, when you talk about games like Missile Command, they're great to play. And on a PC, you can play it with a mouse, and that's almost as good. But to get the real experience, you need the trackable. So that's fantastic. But then on the flip side of that, they haven't then included stuff like Marble Madness. So, that could have also made use of the ball. So they've put it there, which is fantastic. And then they haven't added as many games as they possibly could that would make use of that control mechanism. So that's a bit weird. Let's face it, somebody is going to hack this. So I'm sure they will. There must be a way of loading extra ROMs on these arcade one-ups. Somebody will do it. Yeah, somebody will do it.
Or if not hacking, just ripping it out and replacing the innards with a main device or something.
Gubbins.
Dave, were you just looking up the devices there? I just wanted to know if there was another arcade one-up with a trackball in the past.
I found lots of talk about adding a trackball to one. So my assumption from that is that there isn't one.
So people are buying things like an OptiPack and wiring up a trackball. Chris, you were talking about Missile Command. When was the last time you used a real Missile Command cabinet? Can you remember?
No, not at all.
There's something quite unique about it because it was so sort of early before trackballs were readily available for arcades. They used a skee ball, the small ball from a bowling alley. So it's actually a huge trackball on a Missile Command. It's got a lovely weight to it. It's very hard to replicate with a home trackball. But there you go.
And it's weird. I mean, talking about how important the control mechanism is to replicate the whole feeling. Even, I mean, it's great. Again, they've got the arcade port of that on the collection, which you can run on the PS4 here. So I thought, surely they've allowed mouse support. So I plugged in a USB mouse to the PS4. No mouse support. It's the DualShock controller or nothing. Just such a simple thing, because then if it had supported a USB mouse, well, guess what? It would support a USB trackball. Like, how hard is this?
It's a different
How
thing
hard is
using a DualShock than it is a trackball.
Yeah.
There's no...
Oh, yeah.
They're both analog, but the whole trackball is just a different tactile
It's
thing.
tied into
Yeah.
it, isn't it? You can't get that same feel by using a thumbstick.
No,
And that goes
not.
to other types of games as well. You know, for instance, Star Wars. So you need the proper thing to play the game.
Yeah.
No, I've got
As
one.
you know, he's bought a yoke.
No, it's no yoke.
I do love. I do love that Lee's said, I know I'm not the target audience for it, which is something we always say, but we always seem to cover the arcade one-up stories. We're not really the target
They're very
audience.
interesting.
We're always going to talk about it.
Yeah.
They're
I
interesting
know
what they're pitching at, because they're pitching at the general retro market. So it's interesting to see what they think matters.
I know
it's true.
someone actually. There's a guy on Twitter called Paul Universal Retro Boss who I've had lots of dealings with on my channel, and he's got an amazing cave of his own. And although he would like real arcade machines, he's settled for one-ups. So he's got an Outrun and a Star Wars, and when he gets them, because they're so small, he buys the packs that you can extend them.
The plinth.
The plinth. But he also gets so like for instance the Outrun board or the Outrun cabinet. He bought a board to go into it that gives him loads more games, plus some cosmetic stuff as well to go around the screen. Like there's a special bezel that goes around the screen on the arcade, on the Star Wars cabinet to give it that extra feel. So although I'm not the target audience, I know the target audience, so I feel qualified to talk on this.
The biggest thing for me, the biggest thing that bothers me about the arcade one-ups is the monitor. I just wish it wasn't quite an in-your-face LCD monitor. I just wish they'd done something to make you feel a little bit CRT about it. But other than that, I think they're a reasonable compromise, because the difference in space taken by an arcade machine, not just the height and the width of it, but the distance it comes out from the wall is huge.
The on the subject of the screens, I had the pleasure. I visited Paul not long before I visited this cave, and I had a play on his Star Wars cabinet, and then came into the arcade archive and played on the real thing. And although the purist in me is saying, it's a vector screen, you cannot beat, and it is the first time after so many decades of not seeing the vector screen playing Star Wars, and then walking into the cave on my first visit and into the arcade archive on my first visit there, and seeing that in real life, in the flesh again, just sent shivers down my spine. There is no way you can replicate that on anything else, even on a CRT. It doesn't look the same. But I have to say, playing Star Wars on his one-up machine, I had a lot of fun. It was fine. It was good.
Yeah, you don't need it to be perfect to be good. I've got an arcade. It's not an arcade one-up yoke, but I've got a great big heavy replica of the yoke from Star Wars, and I've got it set up with a flat screen, a 20-inch flat screen, a Dell one, a 4.3, and it's good, because there's no point putting a CRT there, because it's still not going to be a vector. I think you can do certain things in MAME to make the vector, to make the effect of a vector, to make it glow and so on. It's quite good, but it's not perfect, but it's good enough to have fun.
What they've done with the collection, at least on the PS4, I assume it's the same on the other systems as well, including the PC. With the vector games, they've actually tried to, at least to a point, emulate what a vector screen looks like in terms of those really bright points of light in the corners, followed by the dull, lines. So I think as the emulation we've got sorted, and obviously that's not that hard for these older games to get running on modern equipment. So I think my hope is that as emulation evolves and becomes more mature, that's where the concentration will be. Is okay. Now, how do we do the trace of the ball in Pong so that it replicates the fade of a CRT and gives it that tail? And another one of the things they've done on the collection, I know it's not on these. In fact, they should have added these to this arcade cab. It would have been fantastic. They've done some modern reimaginings of some of the older games. And that's exactly how those look. They're sort of this very sort of, retro modern neon style that is quite in vogue. And they've done things like replicate, the tail on balls bouncing around and stuff like that. They've done it over the top, so they're not trying to mimic a CRT or a vector screen, but they've added that sort of extra thing that you got accidentally from the old screens, which is fantastic. Now I've said they should have added those. What they should take off, I think, and this is just personal opinion, is the 2600 games. To me, that doesn't make any sense on this arcade cabinet at all. So, and when you look at the other arcade one-up cabs, they don't have that many games, and they sell. So they didn't need to, shovel a heap of 2600 carts on there. They could have just stuck to replicating the arcade ports and doing those better. I think that would have been a nicer product.
Possibly a tie-in with the 2600 Plus.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah.
When you think back to what Lee said about the controls feeling wrong using a joystick instead of a pad, at least with this, the 2600 games were a joystick, so at least you've got that same control at least. So
that's true.
It costs you, if you're in the United States of America, it costs you $500. If you're in the UK, it costs you £600, which is equivalent of $755. That's 50% extra. It is in the Atari 50th design, so the DVD keep case that Chris is going to hold up again to the screen is the kind of styling that you see on the arcade cabinet. I like it. It does look good. It looks like a nice looking cab. But as Neil says, it's just stickers they stuck in their standard cab. But if it's for you, then you'll know about it. So there you go.
Chris, I'm getting like Steve Jobs vibes from you today.
Steve Jobs vibes? What are you talking about?
Look,
this.
Steve Jobs and Gru sort of combined.
Yeah, maybe the Gru thing. I don't know. Definitely not Steve Jobs. I can wear some glasses. Hang on. How Steve Jobs can I?
There we go. There he is.
Doesn't not quite work. Oh dear.
Can we have viewers? Can we have an answer in the comments of the YouTube comments? Does Chris look more like Despicable Me or more like Steve Jobs?
Despicable Steve.
Oh, nice. Oh, the Mac fans have left the chat. Fantastic. Okay. It would have been around 1998, around that period, at a guess. I was working as an IT administrator for a family-run company of about 100 people. And being the IT administrator, in their wisdom, when they bagged a contract to create some intranet content for a client, they gave it to the IT guy because, that was their thinking. And I did it with the help of my manager, Jim, who was a really nice guy. And between us, we had dabbled in HTML and web page creation. And when I say dabbled, I mean I'd used the editor in Netscape Navigator Gold Edition. And Jim... Gold. And Jim had used Microsoft Front Page. Fast forward through a few projects, and it eventually took a client of ours to point out, after they bothered to look at the code behind the scenes, that perhaps Front Page was not the most professional approach and not up to the standard that they'd been expecting, at least. I mean, the pages worked fine and they looked good. But we began to investigate better ways of doing things. As soon as we were actually charging for these services, it was probably a good idea.
Notepad, perhaps?
No, wouldn't go that far, Neil. Wouldn't go that.
Hot Dog Pro.
Let me tell you some stories of when we went to recruiting some web developers later on. That was quite amusing when I actually asked them to write some HTML from scratch. Not many people could. But anyway, in our investigations...
You've suddenly very quickly gone from the guy who uses Front Page to, I'm an expert. Prove yourself.
But I did. That's exactly what happened.
That was the trajectory, was it, of your career?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, the knowledge that we had to employ better people, that's what led to the recruitment drive. But anyway, before we got to that phase, what we ended up doing was we ended up going to a showcase, a Macromedia showcase in London, and they began to show us the delights of Dreamweaver which looked fantastic. And yes, Dreamweaver was owned by Macromedia before the entire suite was purchased by Adobe, if not the entire company. I think that's how it transpired. Can't remember. Anyway, and then they showcased a web page made entirely in Flash. Now, to put things in perspective, this is the first Flash thing we'd ever seen. It wasn't one of the things that was out there on the web at the time. And this was in the days of dial-up. So your content had to be streamlined. It had to be the smallest file size as possible. I wish some people stuck to that, by the way. And despite our less than professional original approach, we had at least become, masters at things like image compression and choosing the correct image format for the type of picture that you needed to embed, stuff like that. Animated GIFs, which were all over the place in the personal web space world, were frowned upon. Frowned upon GIF. Frowned upon GIF. Graphical GIF were frowned upon in the professional world, and rightly so. But we were actually already working with video compression and how we could make video work online, just because of the nature of the clients that we were dealing with, and how to make things more interesting and interactive and exciting.
So, Chris, are you telling me it wasn't professional to have an animated skeleton's finger pointing to the next page?
No, that's fine.
With a shovel with it under
that's
construction.
Fine. Yeah, I was about to say that's fine, so long as the next page is an under construction banner. Yeah, with a flashing workman light. Yeah, absolutely.
A web ring at the bottom.
So back to this Macromedia conference, right?
Jeff.
Room full of about 250 people. Shut up, Dave. All looking at a large projection screen, and this web page, this fantastic looking web page, full of color, instantly loads, and 250 jaws dropped. Color. The page was full of vibrant colors. There was a drum and bass music loop pumping through the auditorium, and these 3D animated sprites flew in as the page built. It didn't just appear; it kind of built, and the sprites rotated enticingly, and they reacted when you moused over them or when you clicked on them. And the pages, instead of just jumping to the next page, literally transitioned through animation. The whole thing was absolutely stunning. The person running the demo then did the unspeakable. He resized the browser, and nothing broke. Everything scaled perfectly, and the entire page stayed intact. What we were seeing, basically, from our understanding, was the impossible in terms of what you could do on the internet. The music was turned down, and we were told by the person running it, the MC, this entire page is only 25K in size. So 25K, sometimes it was a struggle to get a single image down to that size if it was photographic with lots of colors. So long story short, we went straight back to Kent, had a meeting with the MD of our company, and purchased the entire suite. And what ensued was one of the most exciting and interesting points in my career, at least. We're right at that cusp of, early internet creation and making it sing and dance. Between us and the design studio, we made some fantastic intranet and CD-ROM content for our clients, most of which were in the pharmaceutical industry. And much of it was Flash, even if it was just for navigation elements or intros or scalable title bars, that kind of thing. So I've got very, very fond memories of Flash from a development perspective. But for most people, it was just a format that silly games were delivered in, either, that arrived in emails in the form of exe files, probably with a virus, or as part of web pages. And now, of course, given Flash is dead and gone, deemed bad from an accessibility point of view, which actually it was, and also potentially a security risk at worst. And of course, Apple's refusal to support the format in the original iPhone and all iPhones and iPads since that day, that really didn't help it either. But the question has been raised, are Flash games retro? This question was posted by C3R7X along with a link to the Flash Museum, a webpage where you can revisit the Flash games and animations of the past, flashmuseum.org. So, guys,
that URL.
Yes, I did go to the Flash Museum, and it was fine. Yes, and it wasn't even anything to do with cheesy 80s sci-fi movies either. So, did you guys Flash? Is it retro? And do you have fond flashing or Flash game memories, Dave?
I did play the odd Flash game. I think we all did. I mean, you'd be lying if you said you didn't, but everyone did. So the first thing I went for on this site was Yeti Sports, which is the one of these silly games with penguins and yetis where you're trying to get something to go a certain distance. There's a bit of luck involved in it as well. And I was surprised to see there wasn't just one Yeti sports game. There turned out to be about 10 of them. I only remember playing the one. I could only get a couple to work. And then I did a Google search and found that the games are available in loads of places. And they use this thing called Ruffle. And Ruffle is it's like a virtual machine it's like an emulator for Flash things. So you'll see the Ruffle thing coming up, and then it'll have the Flash game. So I thought Flash was killed off. I thought Flash had been killed off on the internet and you wouldn't see it anymore. And all that's happened is all these sites just use Ruffle to load it in. So all the old sites that remember doing them are still there. Things like Congregate and so on. And in fact, some of the games on this Flash Museum came up with an error message saying the version of this game is URL locked. You can only play it at congregate.com. So I'm not really sure what the museum is. It seems to have just lifted content from other Flash sites and said, this is a museum now. Here's our content now. I'm not sure if they're retro. I started off thinking, no, they're not. And then the more I thought about them, the more I realised, hang on, they maybe are. This is Windows XP machines. This is early Windows XP machines. It's around the year 2000. Yeah, maybe they are retro. Certainly, there's a gap between me playing them back then and now. I didn't play these games for 20 years.
Dave, when you're sort of doing the weighing this up in your head and trying to figure out if it's retro or not, is it clearly the amount of time that's passed would make it fall into the retro category? Is there a certain amount of snobbery towards the technology that's making you sort of consider it to be less than a real game?
I hope not, because that wouldn't be fair of me to do that. I think that there's a big enough gap. I mean, I stopped doing these and now I'm coming back to it, so that to me makes it feel like retro the more I think about it. I did play Learn to Fly 2, just have a look at it to find out why it was popular. I played it all the way through. Played it completely all the way through. I sat there for about an hour and I completed the game. It was a nice game, and it reminded me what these Flash games in some cases were all about. They were nice, soft games where you can't lose and you always make progress. It's just a question of trying again until you work out gathering more money and making your way through it. It was quite pleasant, quite a contrast to the games of the 80s, which went out there to punish you. But yeah, so these games, they probably are retro. I think it's only fair to say they are retro. They feel that way anyway. And certainly when you look at the old animations, all the Weeble stuff and Badger, all those kind of things, that's retro, definitely retro. So there you go. As to the museum being a museum, though, I'm not really sure what's going on there, whether it's legal. We have ROM sites and all the rest of it, and they're, in my mind, fine, because that's the way you have to play these old games. But when they've lifted from sites that are still there making money from advertising and just said, it's on our museum now, I'm not so sure about it now.
Thomas was delighted with you saying Badger. I think, did you just say mashed potato?
Mashed potato.
Mashed potato.
Nice.
A Bodger and Badger fan.
Big favourite.
Badger, mushroom.
You're not going to be able to stop him now.
Welcome to Stroud.
Welcome to Stroud.
Yeah. Lee, what about yourself?
Yeah.
Did I flash?
You went
I'm not going to go.
You've got to ruffle before you can flash.
No, Your Honour, that was someone else.
No, not knowingly. Back then, I'm old, so I was seriously into adulthood at the time, and I was getting down with my PlayStation and moving into the PC world, and I saw Flash games as a kind of throwaway childish thing, because they weren't anything with depth. That was my perception at the time. But since then, I haven't played any of them. But when this story came up, and I thought, I better have a look at what was it all about. I Googled unscientifically the greatest Flash games of all time, and something just popped up at the top of the list saying Line Rider. So I found a playable version of that, and then I lost about 2 hours of my life just making lines with some little stick figure that slides down a line. And it was glorious. And now I feel like I've missed out. But yeah, the thing that struck me was as interesting about this, because you touched on, Chris, you touched on the fact that Steve Jobs killed Flash dead in the water. It feels like Flash back then was kind of an ecosystem for mobile games, but without being mobile. And now the modern day equivalent of that would be the App Store. So I think Mr. Jobs had an agenda.
100%. 100%. And I was very vocal at the time. Everybody was saying, oh, it's not an accessible format and blah, blah, blah. And it all came out of, everybody was fine with Flash until the iPhone didn't support it. And early Android phones did support it. And then sadly, they soon followed suit. And it was all down to that. I assume possibly without any proof behind what I'm saying, because it's only my opinion. But of course, if they're going to come up with these ecosystems where you have to purchase apps or have advertising revenue or whatever, and they can control that, you don't want access to this plethora of existing content, because why would anybody click on your app store?
I spent most of my time actually trying to kill Flash myself, because I looked after everybody's computers in my social circle and some business circles as well. And the Flash caused us lots of problems. So I couldn't wait to get rid of it. But the thing that I used instead of Flash was Java. Java was a similar thing for me. And I can remember having a Nokia N95. It was one of the first kind of smartphones where it was connected to the internet and you could download kind of apps, but they were Java apps. And I had, it was like a stunt cycle game on that. And I would play that today. It was so good. But yeah, that was my, if Flash had been around for that, I probably would have jumped on board, but it just wasn't.
You probably know the answer to this better than I do, Chris, but I get the impression that the beauty of Flash, or part of the beauty of it, was the authoring tools, because it seems like it was possible to rapidly develop, come up with an idea for a game mechanic like Line Rider and very quickly turn it out. And people have a huge amount of fun, not because it's a AAA game with all singing and dancing 3D graphics, just because you've come up with a cool idea.
From a web development perspective, it was all GUI driven. So you could code in it and you could do amazing things if you were a good coder. I never was that good at that. And the great thing, it's like using Premiere. You use, keyframes, timelines, and trigger points, and that's how you develop in Flash. And that made it so accessible for people with the imagination rather than the coding skills. It was really cool.
And what we also saw, because it was so adaptable, and yes, it was useful in the dial-up internet days, but we also saw a huge amount of it, for example, a way to read a manual on a CD-ROM when you got a game, or a behind-the-scenes look at the making of the game. I think like Myst had something like that as well, where you could see the making of the game and it would pop up in Flash, all running off of the CD-ROM rather than having to go off to a web page. So it had its uses beyond just being on the internet. But yeah, my own personal memories, though, I'm afraid, having said that, were silly games and animations. Dave mentioned Weeble and Magical Trevor and things like that. QWOP. So Lee was talking about adulthood and how he saw them kind of as childish games. But actually, when you were then, if you were in a job where you were in an office and you had a mundane job and you wanted to procrastinate, Flash was where it was at. Dave?
Is this in between hitting things with shoes?
This was actually there when I was hitting things with shoes. Sorry, there's a video floating around of me when I've still got hair hitting a computer with a shoe in an office. That's what Dave's referring to there. So QWOP was the game that took hours of my life and turned into a bit of an office competition. So if you haven't played QWOP, you've got a ragdoll on a running track. Q, W, O, and P are the keys that you're playing with. Each key is assigned to a limb. So you're sort of making this ragdoll lift their limbs, and you've got to do it in the right order. Otherwise, they just sort of collapse in on themselves on the running track, and you've got to see how far you can run. It's very difficult and incredibly addictive. And I think he followed it up with what was it called now? I can't remember. Good or something like that, which was a climbing game where each key was assigned to your foot or your hand, which was also
what's that modern
addictive
game that it's an Xbox and PlayStation game where you can control each limb of a character with a different part of the of a joypad. So the
Actually,
shoulder
I think that's the
button,
one I'm thinking of. Yeah,
yeah,
I can't think what it's called.
remember the name of it.
Yeah.
But it's a fighting game where you all have to knock each other off of platforms and things. But that sounds
similar kind of mechanic.
Yeah.
And that's it. Somebody knocks up a mechanic very quickly on Flash, and then a good mechanic will stick around for decades, just because it's fun to play on. It's like I always see Kickstart being recycled over and over again, just the side-scrolling motorcycle game with jumps and a little bit of physics thrown in. That's been done for decades and decades because the mechanic of the game is fun. And the only other thing I'd say about Flash was, for a long time, it was just there. It then became part of the furniture. It became, that was just the internet for certain websites. I wouldn't say it was a sad day when it went away, because things did need to progress a little bit more, and HTML5 was a good thing. But it was, as you say, its demise was accelerated by Mr. Jobs.
I've just realised that it's ideal for smartphones because it all scales to the resolution you want. You don't have to do anything fancy to get that to do. So it would have been ideal for them. And you're right enough, it vanished just as smartphones came on the scene. I never thought about that before, but yeah, Steve Jobs sent out the assassins.
Oh, he certainly did, yeah. Funnily enough, it was that whole scaling thing that led us into some very bad habits, which is why it was deemed as not accessible for a plethora of reasons, but it was quite a dumb thing to rasterize your text just so you could keep the design style of your site, which is a big no-no if you know anything about accessibility. You'd never, ever do that because it means it's not selectable, therefore it's not readable by adaptive technologies and assistive technologies. But anyway, that's a whole other topic. For me, Flash is definitely retro, but as a development tool, as a platform, it was so cutting edge when it came out, and it's a product of the late 90s. So just by the passing of time, it's retro, and it changed. It's so important. I don't think people realize how important it was in terms of changing the expectations of what could be done for online content and how engaging it could have been. We would have been stuck with pages of text with the odd, animated GIF in the corner. While it's dead, it does live on, and you touched on it there, Neil, in terms of HTML5 content. Pretty much everything you could do in Flash, you can do in HTML5. And in fact, as the death knell was ringing, what they did was add an HTML5 export function to the Flash development suite to sort of try and bridge the gap there. But from the Flash Museum, I can't say anything actually jumped out at me as something I remember from back then. But there are some amazing examples of what Flash was capable of, so it is worth a look. Fancy Pants Adventures is the one I found myself spending time on. It's a wonderfully animated stick figure platformer with a really well done hand-drawn aesthetic. It's well worth a look. Do keep in mind that S is jump. It took me ages. I couldn't find instructions and I couldn't figure out what jump is. So there you go. I saved you the time and all the keyboard mashing. S is jump. Other than that, you'll figure it out. Really good, fun game. I miss Flash and I continue to play with it when I moved to Australia. In fact, I had this crazy idea that promotional games, so this was early 2000s, promotional games or even games with advertising sponsors would be the future. Crazy talk. That would never happen. And the last Flash project I actually put my hands to was over here. It was around 2010, as late as that. And it was some work I did for a college for helping students figure out their learning styles. That was quite good fun. But anyway, to round this up, to quote the movie, then, Flash, I love you, but we only have 14 hours to save the Earth.
YouTube started on Flash.
Oh, yes, you're right. Oh, how did I miss that? Yeah, absolutely. Because they did a video embed player for it, didn't they? Yeah, we do owe Flash a lot. There you go. So Flash, we love you, but we only have 14 hours to save the Earth. Save the Earth, said with enthusiasm, Dave.
Time now for our community question of the week. So we'll go with last week's question when we spoke about level 1 gaming and asked which game has your favorite level 1 and why? Is it cleverly designed to make you feel like you've mastered the controls, or does it look so pretty and sound so awesome that you instantly fell for its technical wizardry? That's all about those level 1 games. Dave, have we ended contest mode on our subreddit?
Moments ago, I've just hit the button.
Moments ago. Wow, news just in. So if you want to participate in our question of the week, of course, you go to reddit.com/r/this week in retro. And the top answer I have is from Lord Borak316. I don't believe I've seen that name on the subreddit before, so thank you for joining us and contributing. He says Syndicate has to be my favorite level 1. The instant cyberpunk atmosphere of the game is right there in level 1. The music was also great on the Amiga. It has the right level of difficulty for your team of agents with no mods, armed with pistols and maybe a shotgun, chasing down the target before he escaped. It helped set the stage for the rest of the game and learning the interface. Also returning to the level later on with fully modded teams and 20 Gauss guns, and seeing if you could eviscerate the target by destroying the whole area and massive explosions was a lot of fun. And now I'll shut up. Syndicate, a game with, not a steep learning curve because it eased you into it with each level, and level 1 was where it started. How do you select your characters? How do you move them individually as a team, change the weapons, set their waypoints and all of that stuff. So it makes a huge difference for a complex game like that to be enjoyable and not overwhelming from the start. So I think that's a great answer. Who wants to read the next one?
Lee wants to read it.
I'll read this one.
Oh, it's his own answer.
It's me, and I said, you are in a comfortable tunnel-like hall. To the east, there is a round green door. You see the wooden chest. Gandalf. Gandalf is carrying a curious map. Thorin? Gandalf gives the curious map to you. The rest is a blur in my memory, but that first screen is etched into my memory. Probably a good idea to shut up now.
And Dave is holding up a copy of The Hobbit. Is it Thorin that keeps singing? Is that one? Yes.
Sits down and things, sing about gold. That's such a good game. I don't know how well it's aged if you didn't play it back in the day. I don't know if it's accessible for people, but if you've got the nostalgia for it, it's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, I used to go around to my friend Jason's house, Jason and Marcus's house, and we would crowd around the ZX Spectrum on the floor and work, would be mapping out the locations. And recently, as you do with your nostalgia itch, I went back to scratch it. That scab came off and it wasn't pretty. I think I got to the bit with the trolls and the crack. You read into that what you will.
This takes us back to the imagination gap, and perhaps our imaginations as an adult function differently than our imaginations
we're much
did
more
as
lazy
kids.
now.
we did cover The Hobbit on here quite a while ago now, but it was a real groundbreaking game because there was independent NPCs in it doing their own thing. They were going about and doing stuff. Gandalf would get into fights. Thorin would go about, and it was great. Absolutely amazing game.
I'll do number 3. Happy Coding ZX. Since the guy spoke at length about Star Wars games, I'll say the first 2 levels of Shadows of the Empire on the N64, Battle of Hoth, was truly spectacular. It got everything right, great looking, and the sound effects and music really added to the atmosphere and made you feel like you were taking part in the battle. Bringing down the walkers with the tow cables was the icing on the cake. Shame the rest of the game was a bit of a letdown. Yep. Any Star Wars game is a good game.
Level. Yeah, and there was also that period of getting past Rebel Assault, which was very much an FMV game, and then to actually play texture mapped 3D Star Wars games was a real nice thing, really novel. Felt more like you were in the movie. We've got some other great answers in there. Tasted a Murder made me laugh, talking about Rise of the Robots and talking about how the second level is basically to use the game as a coaster or try and sell the game to some other sucker. Alien Isolation says, I am Amiga, the tension of it all and the eeriness. Now, this is a good answer. It's Tomorrow Now mentions Driver. And you had to do like a driving test before you could play the game proper, and it was notoriously difficult.
I hated that bit of the game.
So he obviously enjoyed it, and I guess you did feel like you'd got good at the game to actually get past that. So there was a feeling of achievement.
He was only 6. I think I was 20.
Richard Shears talks about Grisor on the Amstrad CPC and how great it looked coming out of a CPC. Super Mario Brothers from Chizza. Derek Booth. Rick Dangerous. The first level takes time and patience. It certainly does. And lots of other great answers on that. There's a lot of answers on this week's question of the week. So thank you to everyone for taking part. As always, you can also submit stories for us to talk about. And sometimes those stories prompt the question of the week by heading to reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro. I have got a question of the week down here, but you guys are going to have to help me out here because I was going to go with what are your favorite Flash games, but I've got a feeling we've asked that question before on the show.
I don't remember. Not while I've been on board, I don't think.
With John.
Maybe.
So do we have any advance on favorite Flash games?
Lee's live stream next week is themed around friendship, and he wants to know from you, what are your stories about friendships in video games?
Perfect. And you've done that so well, Dave. I don't think we need Duncan to edit that. They can just hear it straight from you.
Okay.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Tell us your stories of video games and friendship at our subreddit. All the links to follow Lee, just to follow his channel in general, youtube.com/@
More fun making it.
So go and give him a subscription. And also, Can you when have you got a live stream scheduled? Can you click the notification to remind you?
I will be doing that soon. Yes, there will be a live stream scheduled soon.
Great, and we'll try and get as many people watching as possible.
Will it be by Saturday, by the time this releases? Will you have the schedule out by then?
Yes.
Let's see it. Yeah, it's in the show notes.
Ahead.
Great.
Yeah.
So we'll get that in the show notes. And go on.
YouTube don't let you stream for 12 hours.
Okay.
So there's actually going to be 2 live streams. There'll be a small break in between.
Excellent.
And
so
I'll be on it. Neil will be on it, and I'll be on it.
I'll be on it. Chris
didn't get invited.
Sorry,
did not make the cut.
Not invited.
I filled up my
if it's 12 hours,
quota.
Yeah, some of that will be in my, the time when I'm awake.
Yeah.
So I'll try and join on. Absolutely.
Chris will be watching it, and we'll see you all in the live chat there as well. As always, thank you very much for taking the time to watch, and you'll see more of Lee and Thomas in my video next week, and you can get to see all those wonderful ZX Spectrums that'll be going up for auction. Take care. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 This Week in Retro was presented by Neil from RNC The Cave, Chris from 005 Agema, and Dave. It was produced by me, Duncan Stiles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcaster, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/thisweekinretro to suggest and vote on the stories we cover on the show. If you watch This Week in Retro on YouTube, please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you enjoy our show and would like to support it, then please check out the link to our Patreon page in the show notes or description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.